So good afternoon. So before we start, I want to do a small exercise. Okay, are you in for it? Yeah. Okay. So I'll ring the bell, and please raise your hand when you stop hearing the sound. Okay. Okay, I'll do that again. And now try to see if you can notice things that are happening in your body when I'm ringing the bell. You were supposed to also raise your hand. Last time, raise your hand, but also notice if your mind is wandering during this time, okay? If you're completely focused on the sound, or can you notice some kind of maybe mind wandering, okay? Anyone notice mind wandering? Nobody mind wandering? You mind wandering, thanks. Interesting. Okay, so I want to start this talk about mindfulness from giving you a context, because really exciting things are happening in the area of neuroscience, which are very affecting and relevant to this area of mindfulness and mindfulness education. First of all, the realization that for many, maybe for educators is goes without saying, but is that our brains are a very plastic organ, and they're changing all the time. Even at this moment, your brains are changing. And actually, that's the whole point of the brain, to be a plastic organ that could adapt to the ever-changing environment. And the brains are plastic. That means that neural connections are made all the time. The neural connections can be made arbitrarily. It can be made. It could be made because of learning processes, but even because of mental processes that are happening, if they're happening again and again. And most of the time, we're actually not at all in charge of what's influencing the way our brains are changing. One of the really exciting paradigms that are happening today in neuroscience is the understanding that not only is our minds affecting our brains, but also our brains are affecting our minds. Not only our health and the biology of our brains, but also how our mind works, our cognitive, emotional processes, the way we make decisions, the way we feel empathy and understand other people is very affected by the brain. Even the immune system, the hormonal systems are affecting our cognitive abilities. And one of the questions I ask myself all the time is, why isn't our body represented in most educational pedagogies? Our body is not there, right? We also understand today that the brain is a very interpersonal organ. Actually, probably that's how it was developed by evolution, to really understand other people, to communicate with other people, to care for other people. And a lot of the brain areas are actually devoted to our intersocial life, but that's also not really represented in education. And a very exciting finding from about a decade and a half ago is the understanding that our brain is actually active all the time, even when we don't do anything. And actually, when we don't do anything, a lot of important things are happening, and we have what we call the default activity, which is in charge of our mind wandering. And our brain actually mind wanders all the time. Some of you have noticed it now. Even maybe when I'm talking, you might be wandering to other places and other talks and meetings that you had earlier or that you want to do later. And this is actually essential for our existence, because our brain is all the time trying to take what it knew from the past to predict the future. So this mind wandering is actually something very important. But we also know from studies that this mind wandering is occurring about 50% of the time. So 50% of the time, you're actually not listening to me. It's okay, I'm not angry. And during the time that your mind's wandering, actually, it's times where you're not happier, okay? You have to remember, and this is a sentence from the seminal study in science where they showed this in about 6,000 people, how most of the time we wander, and when we wander, we're not happy. And they say, in conclusion, a human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. The ability to think about what is not happening is a cognitive achievement that comes at an emotional cost. And if people mind wander 50% of the time, kids mind wander 50% of the time. What's exactly happening in the class? And why isn't the mind wandering something that we actually take as part of the pedagogic process? Because mind wandering is also something that can be very beneficial. Now, we're mind wandering, we can be very creative when we're mind wandering. But actually, most of the time, we're angry at the children that they're mind wandering, right? And we don't take this to be part of the pedagogic process. These understandings and many others have laid the ground to understanding that we can actually cultivate our minds and brains, and gave rise to a whole field that's called Contemplative Neuroscience. And you can see the sharp rise in studies that actually look at mindfulness practices and what they do in terms of psychological, educational, and brain processes. And there's already more than 6,000 studies around that. And these studies are saying that we can cultivate our brains, our minds, through mental practices that we do again and again, and we can change our brains, change our behavior, change our cognitive abilities. And then the question for me as a neuroscientist is, guys, why isn't it happening in education system as something that starts at the basic level of preschool? Why aren't we cultivating? We know the brain is plastic. Why aren't we doing it from day one? So mindfulness is a term that's a little bit already, these kind of terms that nobody really knows. Two people talk about mindfulness and they don't talk about the same thing because it's like an umbrella term. And I think we can say that mindfulness is actually an umbrella for a term for about 4 practices of families, for 4 practices of families. The first one is what most people talk about, and is cultivating intentional attention to the present moment. That's the first group. The second group is doing that, but with a very important twist, which is what came from the Buddhist ideas, and it's cultivating discerning awareness with a non-judgmental attitude to the present moment. And there's something about this addition which is a paradigm shift. The third family is cultivating wholesome and pro-social mental habits, and the fourth is cultivating ways of looking that decondition our distorted perceptions and deconstruct our subjective experience. Understanding that the brain, when we develop, the brain creates these neural pathways which actually construct the way we see the reality, but it's not because that's the reality, it's the way we construct it, and sometimes it causes a lot of suffering, it causes a lot of misunderstandings. And our ability to free ourselves from that and be able to see things not through this filter can be very, very important for beneficial function. So what's our time? Where's the timekeeper? How much do I have? 11 minutes left? Okay. So we'll do another practice, short practice, yeah? So we're going to do a short M1 practice, okay? So I'm going to ask you to follow your breath. So sit comfortably, follow your breath. It's going to be very short because of time. And I want to ask you to really try to follow your breath. But like I said, 50% chance your mind will wander, right? Every time it happens, you remember that you had an intention to be with your breath and bring it back, okay? And then you'll forget, mind wander, and we'll do that again and again. And actually, this point where you actually suddenly realize that your mind wandered and come back is a very crucial point, because the mind wanders and we bring it back, and the mind wanders and we bring it back, and the mind wanders. What are we doing here? It's a muscle, right? We're creating, we're really changing things. It's like muscle training. Okay, so let's do it. So please sit comfortably. And I suggested to close your eyes. If you feel uncomfortable, just look at the point, try to focus, and Try to find your breath. I suggest in the stomach, because a lot of people that are very brainy, it's very hard. So try to find your breath, and just follow your breath, the in-breath, the out-breath, the transitions. And every time your mind wanders, just gently bring it back. Now see if you can add a intention when you bring your breath back. Bring it in some kind of a humor way, a non-judgmental. It's okay, like you would treat a small naughty kid. It's okay. Bring it back. Some kind of a non-judgmental stance. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes, and I apologize for the short practice, but I do hope that you could somehow sense some kind of a practice that it's here. There's an effort. It's not easy. And this is M1. Now think what happens when you do M2 or M3, M4. Yeah, this is only the beginning. So, as I said, there's already a lot of work showing that when we do even just that, even just the M1, we see changes in brain areas that we know are beneficial for the most fundamental functions that support education. It's emotion regulation, attention regulation, self-regulation, self-awareness, and it again suggests that it's timely to bring it in as something that's basic. And we know already, and you can see a review from 2019 from a very, very important group, that we know these practices, when we go to the whole spectrum of the mindfulness, targets core capacities like meta-awareness, non-reactivity, psychological distance, compassion, all these functions that if we have educators here, we know how much it's basic and important in the educational setting. Oops. Okay. No? Sorry. Okay, I just want to say that from the other side, in the education world, especially in the higher education, but all education world, there's also a revolution that's happening, understanding that something's missing. And we can see what Harry Lewis, which was the head of Harvard College, says. He talked about universities, as we could look at it as all education. A university that's forgotten their larger educational role for students. They succeed better than ever as creators and repositories of knowledge, but they have forgotten that the fundamental job of education is to help grow up the students, to learn who they are, to search for a larger purpose of their lives, and to live better human beings. And that's contemplative pedagogy. And mindfulness has become a central practice in contemplative pedagogy, because in order for us to understand who we are and become better human beings, it doesn't matter what we are learning, we need to bring some of the attention inwards. When a kid goes to school, what is the school saying to him? They're saying, you know, what's happening inside you is not interesting. It's very interesting to learn about geography, about math, about the world, about economy, but what's happening here is not interesting. And we know as neuroscience that what's happening here is maybe the most interesting thing for our abilities to function. And this is why I claim that that mindfulness is probably the most important skill that you can teach children in the 21st century, because it supports so many core capacities like I just mentioned. So I come from the IDC, and we do science, but we also do dissemination work. And we now launched a program last year that's called Purple Schools. It's a whole school approach in which we bring in these qualities, this broad range of deeper qualities into the whole school DNA. We start working with the principal and school leadership in the beginning, and they'll go into the teachers, and the teachers get the skills to work with the children, in the end, the whole community. And it's everywhere. It's the way that the teachers meet in their meeting. It's the way they talk to parents. It's the way that the class begins. It's also the way we teach math, because when I learned math as a kid, also my emotional system is there. My anxieties are there. My thoughts, my dreams are all there when I'm doing a math exercise. So we're starting this program, and I want to end just with giving you impressions of quotes from students that I teach in IDC, where I do contemplative pedagogy, from kids that were affected by these programs. We've been giving mindfulness in schools for the last decade. Now we want to do the whole school approach, and from teachers, okay? So, a student says, I discovered, and this student learned contemplative pedagogy through a neuroscience class. I'm teaching biology, okay? I discovered a lot of new things about myself. I revealed a new perspective instead of looking outwards to focus inwards. That is something that I never experienced personally before. This is a very instructive and enriching experience. We go through 12 years of school, and we're not taught to look inside. Don't you think it's amazing? No? Only me? The dean of our economy of our business school came to me a few days ago, and he said, I really understand that we have to give our students new skills to deal with the 21st century. What I'm giving here is not enough. I want to give everybody mindfulness. And I said to him, well, 1,000 students, to give them mindfulness is not so easy. It's going to be very costly. What about just teaching them 12 years until they get to college these qualities? There was a legitimacy to look inside and sense things that I wouldn't bring to mind. It is important to learn on our bodies and ourselves the connection between body and mind. I generally believe that a good learning process needs to include some personal experience, okay? That's, of course, goes without saying. The training contributed to me personally and made me think about a lot of things that I never thought about in the past. It really added to the learning experience. And by the way, we tested it. This is like you see in a paper, students that did the process and actually did the contemplative exercises remembered the material a year later significantly higher. Let's see. It was the first time I noted the actions that I do, the physical activity that is usually automatic. I felt every movement and investigated how they are done. I think I had experiences that I wouldn't have had an opportunity to investigate in any other way. This is 14-year-old kids, okay? I learned to view the world from different angles, that it's fun to sometimes pause for a few minutes and notice what is happening. When we grow up, it will help us in our finals, in the army, in the life. Thanks to mindfulness, we will be able to enjoy more in life's special moments. I noticed that there are many things, that's different kids, I don't consider important until I actually notice them. I learned that if I notice my thoughts and give them a name, it will be much more easier to put them away. School has become a grade machine, and in mindfulness, you could just be yourself. And other kids, 14-year-old, things can elicit pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings in us, and we need to check what feeling was activated. And in school, unpleasant situations can often happen, and it's helpful to know how to react in a right way. Before mindfulness, I would hit someone that annoyed me. Now I breathe. Yeah, it's so important in schools. Most schools just deal with this kind of behaviors, right? With a lot of aggressiveness. We need to think before we answer, and we can control our reactions. I learned to focus on one thing without other things distracting me. Yeah, that we control the mind wandering, control this default system. Mindfulness helps to deal with stress and boredom, two of the main things that happen in school. I learned to listen, calm, and stay focused and not let different noises bother me. Okay, this ability to start taming our monkey mind, our wandering mind. Basic skill for learning that we don't learn. We learn so many things from preschool, but we don't learn this as a basic skill. Finally, a teacher. It's not a secret I'm not the mindfulness type. As someone that is in a doing mode most of her time, the mindfulness vibe is not for me. or so I thought in the beginning. During the year, I find myself practicing noticing my breath. M1, only M1. Noticing the thought, letting them go, going back to the breath, in the shower, before I start the car towards another day at school, in the supermarket. The experience is of focus, clarity, and lightness. I noticed the effect of this exercise on my student. In lessons that I didn't open with a short practice, they were not able to gather their thoughts and be embodied and present. They really liked the idea that their bodies could be present, but their minds not. I would say to them, if you're here, be really here, be fully present. I hope you are present, and I hope it contributed to you. Thank you very much. And by the way, if someone wants to go into more information, it's in Hebrew. You're welcome.
We have some times for questions if you want.
Yes.
Comment and question. So you probably know the business schools mandated in the SAR for 60 years ago. So the Stanford Business School is now mandating an MBSR course for the students. They have to take it with all the heart failure patients and stuff, realizing that you need those skills and you need that when you go into your corporate life. I had a question about the adolescent mind, the brain. It's not fully formed yet. They're a mess. 14 to 16, you can forget about them. As a practitioner and other practitioners here, you need to practice. A teacher who knows mindfulness in theory and has learned it from you or someone else who's not practicing, can they even teach that? And what is it worth without practicing? So all these comments, are they people who thought they understood it, or are they actually practicing? Have they lost it?
Yeah, great thing. This is why I talked about contemplative pedagogy, because I don't expect the teachers that I teach the mindfulness in school, I don't expect them to become mindfulness teachers, but they do become contemplative pedagogists. So they can start, I start my classes in IDC with a bell, and students come to me at the end of the year and they say, your bell saved my semester. So they can do a lot of small things, what I call M1. They could do a lot of M1 and a lot of bringing attention inwards and working with this contemplative, reflective. This is not mindfulness. This is, to reflect upon your thought, to integrate what's happening. You don't need to be a mindfulness teacher. You just need to be a teacher that appreciates the internal world and the external resonance. So we, in the Purple Schools, we teach the teachers the mindfulness, but then we teach them to work with contemplative pedagogy with the kids. Adolescents, if you look at the brain, this is a hand model of the brain. So this is the frontal system, that's the emotional system. So adolescents, they're not connected. That's why and these systems are very active. So they're very, they're stormy. And actually what's happening as we grow older, this starts to connect. And mindfulness practices that do this muscle, it's actually like I saw it also in the brain picture, we're actually, we're strengthening the executive function. So we're actually helping these things to connect and help them regulate themselves. So I have to say that I think teenagers are the ones that react most to mindfulness practices, but in practical aspects, it's better to start from the kindergarten and just give boosts during all the years and have the skill so basic that it's like riding a bicycle, and you can activate it. And when you're a teenager and you're all stormy and you're all confused, I know how to regulate myself. I know how to breathe. I know how to stop. I know how to look at the world around me and see how people connect to me.
This is not new. It's been done in the East, in the Oriental.
Not new, and you know what? It's so hard. It's like a paradigm shift in the West, and it's a question why for us it's such a surprise, and not go without saying. Why do I have to spend my time here to convince you guys with something which I think is really,
Just a quick question. When you mentioned the different levels of mindfulness, like M1, M2, and M4, are they laid out in? Are the M1 through M4 are they laid out in a hierarchy? So is it true that M1 is a prerequisite to M2?
Yes, so partially. M1 and M2, of course, are hierarchical, and M4, M1, M2, M4. M3 are more pro-social skills, and you can go, to M4 without M3, but the wisdom of the East shows that we actually need them on the way to be able to, for you to be able to let go of your biases, you somehow need to have a lot of, I would say, self-compassion and courage. Yeah.
Okay, unfortunately we need to stop. It's very fascinating, so if anybody wants, they can catch you outside, I guess.
I'll stay here for some time. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nava.